It ain't my business what he did. Only thing I want to know, was he my friend? Did I enjoy him as...
The heavy velvet curtain backstage at the International Hotel had just dropped on a sold-out performance. Sammy Davis Jr. leaned over to a senior executive and uttered a single, quiet sentence about the headliner's true physical condition. He did not know that a rolling tape recorder in the sound booth caught every single word. Within 24 hours, that brief observation triggered a massive corporate panic that permanently altered the singer's final contract. The tape was buried for 40 years, but the transcript just leaked. The dressing room whisper. The reels of the Ampex tape recorder spun in total silence inside the sound booth of the International Hotel. It was after midnight on August 20th, 1974. The audience had already emptied out into the main casino floor, leaving behind the faint smell of tobacco smoke and spilled champagne. Downstairs, in the private dressing room suite, a casual conversation was taking place between two men who had spent their entire lives under the stage lights. They thought the room was secure. They did not realize that the engineering team had left the master microphones live to capture any technical feedback from the evening's performance. Sammy Davis Jr. sat on the edge of a low leather sofa, still wearing his stage tuxedo. He was pouring a glass of water when the senior vice president of the hotel management division walked in to deliver the nightly box office receipts. The numbers were staggering, breaking every previous attendance record for the summer season. But Sammy did not look at the paperwork. He looked toward the heavy door that led to the star's private sleeping quarters. He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and spoke a single, chilling sentence about the headliner's true physical condition. He stated plainly that the man behind that door would not survive the length of the new 5-year contract extension. He didn't say it with malice. He said it with the quiet certainty of a fellow performer who recognized the exact signs of physical and emotional exhaustion. Sammy pointed out that the singer's eyes were glassy, his movements were rigid, and his voice was being sustained entirely by chemical intervention. He told the executive that they were not running an entertainment venue anymore. They were running a highly profitable circus that was actively consuming its main attraction. The hotel executive did not answer right away. He knew that if Sammy's observation became public, it would instantly jeopardize the multi-million-dollar refinancing package currently being negotiated with a group of East Coast investors. The investors were backing their financial projections entirely on the guarantee of 200 sold-out shows per year from the king of rock and roll. The executive immediately left the dressing room and walked up the service stairs to the sound booth. He ordered the head engineer to stop the tape, remove the reel from the machine, and hand it over directly. The engineer complied, but he had already made a secondary safety copy on a smaller cassette tape for the technical archives. That safety copy was placed into a mislabeled cardboard box marked Microphone Tests 1974 and moved to a climate-controlled storage locker in North Las Vegas. It sat there undisturbed through decades of corporate restructuring, hotel demolition, and ownership changes. The box was finally opened during an estate liquidation sale after the casino corporation filed for bankruptcy protection. The leaked transcript of that tape challenges the official Hollywood history of the era. The public was told that the relationship between the two stars was purely one of mutual admiration and casual friendship. They were seen hugging for the cameras at promotional events, smiling under the bright lights of the casino marquee. The tape proves that behind the scenes, Sammy's comment caused a massive wave of panic through the executive offices. The management team did not see the comment as a warning from a concerned friend. They saw it as an immediate threat to their corporate survival. The lead manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was informed of Sammy's remarks by 6 o'clock the following morning. The colonel did not call Sammy to discuss the matter. He went straight to the hotel's board of directors. He demanded that Sammy's upcoming winter dates at the property be reviewed for potential cancellation. He used a minor clause in Sammy's performance agreement regarding outside publicity to argue that the entertainer was actively working to undermine the financial stability of the resort. The tension inside the executive suite grew incredibly thick over the next 48 hours. The colonel was terrified that Sammy would repeat his observation to his close friends in the Hollywood press corps. Sammy was a regular guest on national talk shows, and he possessed the kind of cultural influence that could shift public perception with a single interview. If the entertainment industry began to believe that the king was physically failing, The ticket sales for the upcoming seasons would plummet, and the insurance companies would pull their coverage for the live performances. The response from the management team was swift and highly transactional. They did not adjust the singer's grueling schedule. They did not order a medical evaluation. Instead, they began drafting an emergency addendum to the master contract. The new paperwork, finalized on August 23rd, included an aggressive non-disparagement clause that applied not just to the singer's own staff, but to any guest performers who accessed the backstage area. The clause allowed the management team to instantly confiscate any audio or visual recordings made on the property without prior written approval. The housekeeper who cleaned the executive offices found the rough drafts of these contract changes in a wastebasket near the shredding machine. She noted in her personal diary that the lawyers were working through the night, using terms like reputational containment and asset protection. The focus was entirely on silencing anyone who could see past the glittering costumes and the heavy stage makeup. The singer himself was never told about the contract addendum or the panic caused by Sammy's whisper. He simply received a fresh stack of signature pages to sign between his dinner and midnight shows. This brings us to a major question that the music industry has spent 50 years trying to bury. Why did a single quiet observation from a fellow entertainer carry enough weight to reshape a multi-million-dollar corporate contract? The answer lies in the unique perspective that Sammy possessed. He knew the cost of the lights. He knew what a human body looked like when it was being forced to perform against its own limitations. His words were dangerous because they were completely true, and the people running the venue knew it. They couldn't afford to let the truth interfere with the cash flow. The clash of the Vegas courts. The International Hotel was divided into two distinct geographical territories. The ground floor was a loud, chaotic expanse of green felt tables, clanging slot machines, and bright neon lights. But the penthouse floor belonged to a completely different world. It was a private kingdom where the rules of the outside world ceased to exist. Access to this level required a special gold key card and the personal clearance of the executive director. It was here, in the Imperial Suite, that the two largest entertainment factions on the Strip collided in the summer of 1974. On one side of the corridor stood the camp of the resident rock icon, managed with a military grip by his longtime promoter. This faction valued absolute isolation and unwavering discipline among the staff. Across the hall sat the entourage of the legendary Rat Pack clique, including Sammy Davis Jr. This group operated with an open-door policy, welcoming Hollywood writers, jazz musicians, and prominent political figures at all hours of the night. The two worlds were physically separated by just 50 feet of thick red and gold-patterned carpet, yet the cultural and financial gap between them was immense. The hidden financial rivalry between these two camps centered on the hotel's limited credit lines. The casino management division maintained a highly confidential list of high-rolling gamblers who were granted unlimited credit to attend the celebrity performances. Both headliners relied heavily on these specific individuals to guarantee massive revenue figures for their respective seasons. If a prominent oil tycoon from Texas spent his entire holiday budget during the rock icon's August engagement, there would be nothing left for Sammy's winter season. The competition for the loyalty of these wealthy patrons was fierce, silent, and deeply personal. A secret midnight summit took place inside the hotel's presidential boardroom on August 21st, just 24 hours after Sammy's dressing room whisper. The meeting was called by the vice president of casino operations, who needed to resolve a mounting dispute over scheduling priority. The rock promoter had demanded that his artist be granted an exclusive, multi-year monopoly over the coveted New Year's Eve performance dates for the remainder of the decade. This slot had traditionally been reserved for Sammy and his close associates. The atmosphere in the boardroom was incredibly tense. The promoter sat at the end of the long glass table, refusing to remove his trademark fedora. He stated bluntly that his artist was the sole reason the hotel was able to meet its monthly mortgage payments to the insurance syndicate. He hinted that if the hotel refused to grant the exclusive dates, he would open immediate negotiations with a rival resort currently under construction down the Strip. The threat was clear, and it was devastating to the hotel's long-term financial projections. Sammy's management team countered with an entirely different set of data. They presented internal room occupancy reports proving that while the rock icon sold out the main showroom, his audience consisted largely of middle-class tourists who spent very little money on the high-stakes gambling tables. Sammy's crowd, by contrast, was packed with high-rolling celebrities, international athletes, and corporate executives who routinely dropped hundreds of thousands of dollars in the private baccarat pits after the curtain fell. The hotel was actually making a higher net profit during Sammy's shorter runs than during the massive, exhausting engagements of the resident headliner. The question that dominated this secret summit was highly specific. Which luxury suite would host the upcoming national television special planned for the Winter Network lineup? The network producers wanted a collaborative program featuring both stars performing together on a single stage. It was a project that could have generated millions of dollars in syndication fees for both camps. But the rock promoter flatly refused to allow his artist to share the spotlight. He viewed the television special as a direct threat to his absolute control over the star's public image. The boardroom argument lasted until 4 o'clock in the morning. The hotel executives found themselves completely trapped between the raw box office power of the rock icon and the highly profitable elite clientele brought in by Sammy's circle. In the end, the corporate decision was based entirely on immediate cash flow, rather than long-term artistic sustainability. The executives sided with the rock promoter, officially signing over the exclusive New Year's Eve monopoly and quietly shelving the plans for the collaborative television project. The lines of celebrity influence in Las Vegas had been permanently redrawn, and the consequences of that decision would soon prove disastrous for everyone involved. The unofficial diagnosis. The main showroom of the International Hotel was a massive subterranean amphitheater that seated over 2,000 people. The stage was wide enough to accommodate an entire 30-piece orchestra, a gospel choir, and a full rock band simultaneously. The lights were designed to create a blinding, incandescent glow that completely obscured the audience from the performer's view. But from his regular vantage point in the third-row celebrity booth, Sammy Davis Jr. could see every single line on the headliner's face. On the evening of August 22nd, Sammy attended the dinner show as a guest of the hotel's managing director. He did not applaud when the opening fanfare began. He sat with his hands folded, watching the physical mechanics of the performance with a critical, professional eye. He noticed details that the roaring, ecstatic crowds completely missed. He saw that the singer was leaning heavily against the microphone stand just to maintain his balance during the slower ballads. He noticed that the performer's left hand was trembling so violently that he had to wrap his fingers in the wire of the microphone to conceal the movement. This was not the vibrant, athletic entertainer who had redefined live music a few years earlier. This was a man performing under the weight of a severe, unacknowledged physical collapse. Sammy turned to the managing director sitting beside him and pointed out a specific technical error. The singer had missed the cue for the third verse of the opening song, forcing the conductor to loop the orchestration 3 times before the vocals began. The public assumed it was an ad-libbed performance choice. Sammy knew it was a definitive sign of spatial and mental disorientation. The unofficial diagnosis that Sammy shared with the executive after the show was rooted in his deep understanding of industry exploitation. He pointed out that the singer's current scheduling format, performing 2 full 90-minute sets every single night for 4 consecutive weeks, was a biological impossibility without heavy chemical assistance. The human vocal cords and the cardiovascular system could not endure that level of sustained stress under the intense heat of the stage lights. Sammy warned the executive that the management team was treating the star like a machine, completely ignoring the fact that his body was actively shutting down. The warning was viewed by the corporate office as an aggressive act of sabotage. The lead promoter, Colonel Tom Parker, received a typed transcript of Sammy's showroom comments from a security guard who had been stationed near the celebrity booth. The colonel's retaliation was immediate and multi-layered. He did not directly confront Sammy, who was too prominent a figure to intimidate openly. Instead, he used his considerable leverage with the local entertainment unions to create immediate administrative obstacles for Sammy's upcoming winter production. The next morning, the hotel's production manager notified Sammy's stage crew that their access to the main rehearsal hall had been restricted to 3 hours per week, down from the 20 hours previously agreed upon in their contract. The official reason given was a scheduling conflict with a new Magician Act. The real reason was a direct, punitive strike ordered by the corporate office to remind Sammy's camp who truly controlled the infrastructure of the resort. The management team wanted to make it absolutely clear that any criticism of the headliner's health would carry a heavy operational cost. Now, the question is, who was responsible for protecting a global icon when his own inner circle refused to acknowledge his decline? The hotel executives knew the singer was failing. The stagehands knew it. The backing musicians spoke about it in hushed tones in the employee cafeteria, but everyone was locked into a highly lucrative financial system that relied entirely on the continued operation of the main attraction. To speak the truth out loud was to threaten the livelihoods of hundreds of people. Sammy's refusal to remain silent created a dangerous crack in the corporate facade. He represented an independent voice that could not be bought or controlled by the local promotional team. He had his own direct relationship with the resort's owners, and his observations carried a level of artistic authority that the accountants could not easily dismiss. The corporate managers realized they could not allow Sammy to continue watching the performances from the front row. They needed to create a permanent, administrative barrier between the two stars before the truth escaped the confines of the backstage area. The paper trail in the desert. The administrative offices of the International Hotel were located in a low, concrete wing behind the main kitchen bays. The windows faced a gravel courtyard where the industrial air conditioning units vibrated constantly against the desert heat. Inside this wing, a file clerk named Evelyn handled the internal distribution of corporate expense reports and production memos. On the morning of August 24, 1974, she processed a stack of paperwork that provided immediate physical evidence of the backstage fallout from Sammy's dressing room comment. The most telling document was a corporate check voucher drawn from a secondary account labeled Special Promotional Contingencies. The voucher authorized the immediate disbursement of $45,000 to a private public relations firm based on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. The handwritten notation in the justification column was brief and written in the distinctive blue ink used exclusively by the lead promoter, Colonel Tom Parker. It read, Media Monitoring Services Narrative Neutralization. This voucher was signed less than 12 hours after Sammy had openly questioned the singer's survival during his conversation with the hotel vice president. The corporate managers were not waiting to see if Sammy's warnings would leak to the Hollywood press. They were proactively buying up the loyalty of key entertainment columnists. The paper trail shows that 3 prominent entertainment editors received all expenses paid weekend trips to Las Vegas that very same week. Their subsequent articles completely omitted any mention of the singer's visible exhaustion, focusing instead on his record-breaking box office numbers and his legendary charisma. The financial adjustments did not stop with public relations. Evelyn processed a separate, urgent revision to the production budget for the upcoming September engagement. The line item for the backstage hospitality lounge was abruptly slashed by 75%. This was the specific area where guest performers, musicians, and visiting celebrities gathered to socialize after the late-night sets. The reduction was not an attempt to save money for the estate. The mansion account was flush with cash from the sold-out summer season. The budget cut was a deliberate operational tactic designed to eliminate the physical space where informal conversations could happen. The corporate handlers ordered the removal of the complimentary bar, the catering tables, and the comfortable lounge seating from the backstage hallway. It was replaced by a row of industrial storage lockers and a single security desk. The message to the entertainment community was unmistakable. The backstage area was no longer a place for social interaction. It was a restricted industrial corridor where outside visitors were no longer welcome. The paper trail also reveals a sudden, unexplained change in the hotel's security protocol. On August 25th, a directive was sent to the chief of the resort's private security team. The memo ordered that 2 plainclothes security officers be permanently assigned to the service elevator that connected the basement dressing rooms to the upper penthouse suites. These officers were given a typed list of individuals who were to be barred from using the elevator under any circumstances. Sammy Davis Jr.'s name was at the very top of that list, highlighted with a red marker. A mystery that puzzled the clerical staff was why a prominent Hollywood talent agency, which represented both stars for their television syndication deals, abruptly canceled a scheduled joint meeting on August 26. The meeting had been on the corporate calendar for 6 months. It was intended to finalize the contracts for a lucrative, multi-state television special, that would have featured both men performing classic American standards together. The project was projected to earn each entertainer over $500,000 in initial broadcast fees alone. The cancellation notice was a single, curt paragraph sent via telex from the agency's Beverly Hills office. It cited unforeseen, irreconcilable scheduling conflicts as the official reason for pulling out of the project. But the internal memos attached to the file tell a completely different story. The agency had been notified by the rock promoter that if they proceeded with any joint project involving Sammy Davis Jr., he would instantly pull his artist from their representation roster and take his multi-million-dollar booking business to a rival firm. The talent agency was forced to make a rapid, cold calculation. They could either protect the artistic integrity of a historic, collaborative television special, or they could protect their primary source of commission revenue. They chose the revenue. The paperwork for the television special was moved to the dead files cabinet in the basement archive room the very afternoon. The project was completely erased from the corporate memory, a direct casualty of the panic generated by a single, honest observation made in a dressing room. The final piece of paper in the August file was an invoice from a local locksmith company. The invoice detailed the installation of 6 new heavy-duty deadbolts on the interior doors of the star's private suite. The keys to these new locks were not distributed to the hotel's regular floor maids or the personal assistants. Only 2 copies were created. 1 copy was given to the lead corporate guard, and the other was kept in the personal desk drawer of the promoter himself. The physical environment surrounding the king had been completely locked down. He was now separated from his peers by a complex system of administrative budget cuts, non-disclosure forms, private security guards, and heavy iron locks. He sat alone at the top of the resort, entirely unaware that the paper trail in the desert was systematically cutting off every bridge that connected him to his friends in the outside world. The corporate handlers had successfully protected their asset from any further independent evaluation, ensuring that the multi-million-dollar machine would keep running without interruption until the final curtain fell. Divided loyalties. Under the neon lights. The employee locker room behind the main showroom kitchen was suffocatingly hot during the final week of the August engagement. The scent of bleached chef coats, damp floor mops, and floor wax hung thick in the narrow space between the green metal lockers. This room served as the informal neutral ground, where the backing musicians, the horn players, and the rhythm section met to smoke cigarettes between the dinner and midnight shows. By August 27, 1974, the casual conversations about jazz arrangements and chord progressions had completely stopped. The room was divided by a heavy, unstated tension. The division was triggered by the sudden introduction of a mandatory legal document. The corporate managers from the California firm had stationed an estate attorney at the employee entrance desk with a stack of fresh 3-page non-disclosure agreements. Every musician, backing vocalist, and stagehand was required to sign the document before they were allowed to collect their weekly paychecks. The paperwork explicitly prohibited the staff from discussing anything they witnessed within the perimeter of the dressing room corridor, particularly regarding the physical condition or medical treatments of the headliner. The backing band found themselves trapped in a classic labor struggle with high stakes. On one side, the older seasoned studio musicians from Los Angeles argued that they should refuse to sign the paperwork. They felt the agreement was a direct insult to their decades of loyal service and a transparent attempt to cover up a brewing medical crisis. They pointed out that they had already seen the singer collapse onto a sofa immediately after the August 25th midnight set, requiring a personal assistant to revive him with an oxygen mask before he could change out of his wet stage suit. On the other side of the locker room stood the younger local horn players and the gospel vocalists, whose financial survival depended entirely on the continued operation of the Las Vegas residency. They knew that if they refused to sign the documents, they would be replaced by tomorrow morning's rehearsals. The local union representative had already quietly informed them that the corporate management team had a backup orchestra standing by at a rival casino downtown. The financial pressure was absolute. One by one, the musicians stepped up to the desk, pressed their signatures onto the legal forms, and took their checks. The implementation of these aggressive non-disclosure agreements successfully isolated the two headliners from each other. Sammy Davis Jr.'s regular backing musicians were completely barred from entering the main showroom backstage area during the daytime rehearsal hours. If a jazz saxophonist from Sammy's band wanted to drop off a sheet of music for the rock icon's rhythm section, he had to leave it with a plainclothes security guard at the basement checkpoint. The casual late-night jam sessions that had defined the backstage culture of the hotel for years were completely dismantled by administrative decree. The core mystery that fueled the paranoia during that final week centered on the identity of an executive mole. The rock promoter had somehow obtained a complete, verbatim transcript of a private dressing room conversation that had taken place inside Sammy's suite on the night of August 28th. During that private gathering, Sammy had discussed the possibility of organizing an independent medical intervention for the king, using a respected heart specialist from the UCLA Medical Center. The promoter knew about the plan within 2 hours of the meeting's conclusion, allowing him to contact the university board and threaten to withdraw a massive charitable endowment if the doctor got involved. The suspicion among the staff fell heavily on a senior audio technician who had free access to the building's internal intercom lines. The technician had been seen entering the promoter's office late at night, carrying a black leather tape case. The housekeeper who cleaned the executive suite noted in her ledger that the technician's monthly bonus had suddenly been doubled, drawn from the hotel's private marketing fund. The corporate team was actively paying for internal espionage to ensure that any attempt to help the singer from the outside was instantly neutralized before it could gain traction. This brings us to the question that dominated the thoughts of the silent witnesses under the neon lights. How long could a multi-million-dollar entertainment empire survive when it was built entirely on a foundation of forced silence and mutual distrust? The musicians could see the physical toll the situation was taking on the king. He was no longer communicating with the band during the sets. He simply stared ahead, waiting for the conductor to start the next arrangement, moving through the choreography like a ghost. The tension finally broke into open conflict during a closed-door rehearsal on the afternoon of August 29th. The lead guitar player, who had been with the singer since the early days of his career, stopped playing in the middle of a song. He walked to the edge of the stage and openly questioned why the corporate managers were forcing the singer to rehearse a new, fast-paced medley when he could barely stand up for 20 minutes without gasping for air. The guitarist's protest was met with an immediate, icy silence from the front row seats where the handlers sat. The lead manager did not argue with the musician. He simply turned to his assistant and made a small gesture with his pen. 2 security guards walked onto the stage, took the guitarist's instrument case, and escorted him out of the building through the rear loading dock. His contract was terminated on the spot for gross insubordination, and his name was added to the resort's permanent trespass list. The remaining musicians sat completely still in their chairs, staring at their sheet music. They realized then that their loyalty was not valued. Only their absolute compliance mattered to the people who ran the venue. The vacancy on lead guitar was filled by an anonymous session musician from Nashville within 4 hours. The new player didn't know the singer's personal habits. He didn't know his vulnerabilities, and he didn't care about the medical crisis unfolding behind the dressing room doors. He was simply there to read the notes on the page and collect his standard union scale fee. The corporate handlers had successfully eliminated the last remaining voice of dissent within the musical inner circle, reinforcing the wall of isolation that Sammy Davis Jr. had tried so desperately to breach with his initial prophetic whisper. The long shadow of a single sentence. The final performance of the August residency took place on September 2nd, 1974. The neon sign outside the International Hotel flickered under the desert sky, announcing another sold-out house. The public rushed through the front doors, eager to catch a glimpse of the legend before the tour caravan left Las Vegas. But behind the heavy stage curtains, the atmosphere was completely depleted of energy. The housekeeper, clearing the service trays from the lower green room, noted that the corporate security team had already begun loading the singer's personal trunks into the back of an armored transport van parked in the secure alleyway. The single sentence Sammy Davis Jr. had whispered into the dark weeks earlier had now hardened into an unshakable institutional reality. The corporate management team had spent the remaining days of the season codifying that warning into a permanent system of administrative control. They did not change the singer's medical routine, nor did they grant him the 6-month sabbatical that his primary physicians had quietly recommended. Instead, they took the financial infrastructure that Sammy had inadvertently threatened and made it completely legally airtight against any future outside interference. A final, definitive piece of paperwork was filed with the Clark County Recorder's Office on the morning of September 3rd. This document was an updated corporate restructuring agreement for the singer's touring entity. Tucked away on page 47, under a sub-heading titled Operational Continuity, was a newly drafted legal clause that became known among the estate lawyers as the exclusion mandate. The clause explicitly stated that no unauthorized personnel, including fellow contract entertainers under lease at the hotel, were permitted to enter the primary performer's rehearsal spaces, dressing suites, or private transport vehicles without 48 hours of written notice and the co-signature of the lead promoter. The permanent changes to the landscape of live entertainment were immediate. The casual cross-pollination of talent that had made the Strip legendary during the 60s was systematically criminalized by corporate contract. Performers were no longer treated as colleagues who could share a late-night drink and an honest conversation about the pressures of the industry. They were treated as rival corporate assets that needed to be strictly segregated to prevent the exchange of unauthorized information. Sammy's camp found their own subsequent performance contracts, updated with identical language during their winter negotiations, effectively banning them from visiting any other headliner's backstage area on the property. Sammy's informal diagnosis of the singer's physical decline proved entirely accurate. The corporate handlers had successfully managed to patch up their primary asset for the remainder of the 1974 season, using every administrative and legal tool at their disposal to conceal the reality from the public. They had silenced the musicians, bought off the entertainment editors, and physically locked the dressing room doors against anyone who cared enough to stop the exploitation. They had preserved the cash flow, but they had fundamentally doomed the man. The true motive behind this aggressive isolation campaign became undeniable during the subsequent probate audits years later. The corporate management firm had used the period of forced silence between 1974 and 1977 to systematically transfer the singer's international licensing copyrights to a series of secondary holding companies based in Delaware. These transfers required dozens of signature pages, all verified by the same pre-signed rubber stamps that the staff had seen sitting in the lower office desk drawers. Had Sammy or any other independent peer managed to break through the security cordon and convince the singer to hire independent legal counsel, the entire multi-million-dollar copyright transfer would have been instantly challenged in open court. The housekeeper who had preserved the safety copy of the Ampex sound booth tape finally gave her notebook to a local archive circle decades after the hotel had been demolished. She wrote that the true tragedy of the era was not the physical decline itself, but the absolute loneliness that surrounded it. She recalled looking through the pantry window on that final night of September 2nd, watching the singer walk slowly toward the armored van. He was surrounded by 4 private security guards who did not speak to him. He looked across the gravel courtyard toward the upper penthouse windows where Sammy's band was pack up their instruments. He paused for a brief second, as if looking for a familiar face in the dark, before a guard pressed a hand against his shoulder and guided him into the rear seat of the vehicle. The long shadow of Sammy's single sentence still hangs over the history of live performance. It was a brief moment where the corporate mask slipped, revealing the high-stakes machinery that converts human talent into institutional revenue. The warning was ignored by the executives, punished by the promoters, and buried by the lawyers. But the cracked Ampex tape and the dusty paper trail in the desert remain as a permanent testament to the truth. The king was not destroyed by a sudden, unpredictable twist of fate. He was systematically consumed by a corporate system that simply could not afford to let him stop, even when a fellow icon stood in the dark and told them exactly how the story would end. A single honest warning backstage was treated like an act of corporate espionage, proving how far the handlers would go to protect their investment. Sammy Davis Jr. saw the truth through the glitter, but the multi-million-dollar machinery simply couldn't afford to stop. What do you think was the most calculated part of this backstage lockdown? Was it the non-disclosure agreements or the deliberate cancellation of their joint television